Hey, Ward 2 voters. I'm Ben Dalley with the Ward 2 Democrats. Really excited to sit down here today with Jacques Patterson, who's running for at-large council. As a reminder, I am on the Ward 2 Democrats. I am the communications chair. We were doing this series of interviews with candidates who are running for our June 16th primary. The goal of this is to allow candidates to speak directly to Ward 2 voters, to allow them to introduce themselves to Ward 2 voters and answer questions that we've collected from our community that relate to us every day in Ward 2. So, with that being said, I would like to introduce Jock and allow Jock to introduce himself to Ward 2 voters.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben, for providing this platform for me to kind of talk about the issues and introduce myself a little bit more so with Ward 2 voters to make sure that they understand why I'm running and my passion for this city. So I'm Jacques Patterson. I'm a father, I'm a husband. I've lived in Ward 8 since 1995. I came here by way of military. I was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base and decided to buy a house in Ward 8. As my friends were moving to other parts, like out in Maryland, I knew that Ward 8 was where I wanted to serve, and I've been serving our city for over 30 years. I was an ANC for 10 years, an ANC 8B, chairing it for 3 of those terms. And school was so important to me because, as I said, I arrived as a single father when I first got here. And so schools became my number one priority, getting my daughter into a quality school, getting the support systems around her. So I got into schools and I've been working in schools quite a bit. I've worked for places like KIPP DC and Rocket Ship, but now I'm serving on the State Board of Education. I'm the at-large representative, so thank you first and foremost, these Ward 2 voters, for giving me votes that got me to my at-large position that I'm currently in, and I'm currently serving as the president as well. So that's a little bit about me, and I look forward to answering all the questions and talking about them.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. And one of the questions we always ask everybody is how that background and your experience connects to the position that you're currently running for. So, what about your experience and your vision for DC makes you the right person to be the next at-large council member in the council?
I actually think I have the longest tenure of the two candidates, my other two candidates that are in this, for the simple fact that I've been here over 30 years. I've worked and been assigned to different boards and commissions over those years. I've served on the Housing Authority, no, not the Housing Authority, but the Housing Finance Agency Board. I've served for the Historical Preservation Review Board. I've been a reserve MPD officer, and as I said, an ANC. And I've just served in a lot of these different places that provides me a lot of insight into what really matters in community. And I know to Ward 2 voters, what's going to be very important as we face some of these budget constraints that they're projecting over the next 4 years as a $1.1 billion kind of like constraints on our budget, is that you're going to need someone that is community focused and has been in communities and know how to really engage communities about what's important to your particular community. And we're running for at large. So it's really instrumental that you get into communities and talk to them. That means being present and having the experience of actually also being a capital city fellow and serving in the administration of Mayor Williams as his community affairs coordinator. I know how to get into communities and talk to them and make the right decisions at the right times to move us forward without people feeling like we're making decisions for them and not with them. So that's what best qualifies me for the role right now at this vital time.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds like you've had a lot of roles over your history in DC and seen a lot of different aspects of it.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to hear that. And all that probably will translate into some of the questions we have upcoming. So the first question we have is public safety. What strategies would you pursue to improve public safety and community well-being in Ward 2, including every neighborhood, downtown, Logan Circle, Georgetown, DuPont Circle, Foggy Bottom, and so
So
forth?
the interesting thing is I've worked in a lot of the places that you just named in the neighborhoods that you've talked about. My last office was actually in Foggy Bottom, but I've worked with schools and I've been an MPD officer, as I said earlier. And so I've worked intimately with violent interrupters and also, of course, with our MPD officers. And having also served in the military, I understand with the National Guards on our streets right now that we don't need them there, but I also understand how you have those type of relationship. So my plan is simple, okay? Right now, what we have is a overtime budget that is truly killing our budgetary system right now from MPD officer to the point that it's $76.6 million that is dipping into our regular budget. And so what I would like to do, because I served as a reserve officer, is to reconstitute that program that doesn't cost the city very much money and use those extra money because we're right now around 3,100 and we really should be at 44,000 police officers. And we want to make sure that we get to that capacity, but not overburden officers that are currently there, which they're doing through overtime, and that's bad for morale. And then also what I want to do is make sure that we also invest in our violent interruption programs, because that lessens the tensions that we're seeing with youth violence and some of the incidents that we're seeing in certain commercial areas. If we truly fund that, and not just during school hours, but after school hours where things are happening, where those relationships can be built, we know that we'll see a decrease. And the reason I say that, real frankly, is because when I was working at KIPP DC and working in Ward 5 in the Ivy City, Trinidad area, by using violent interrupters very well through MPD and school officers, we were able to bring down crime around that area with youth about 40%. So that's my strategy.
That's great. Love to hear more about some of that violent interruption. I'll circle back to that in a little bit. Second question is regarding small business and economic vitality. Walking around Ward 2, it's hard not to notice how many empty storefronts and restaurants there are all over Ward 2, particularly downtown. I live in Logan Circle. We see a lot of these storefronts recently. So Ward 2 has seen an increase in commercial vacancies in recent years. What policies would you pursue to strengthen small businesses, activate vacant storefronts, and support a vibrant local economy?
Yeah, I love this question because small business is also one of our biggest priorities. And the biggest thing that I'm seeing as I walk around and actually talk to our small businesses is some of the red tape to actually open a business and to sustain a business. We have to make sure, especially with we've seen a lessening in foot traffic for a lot of our businesses because we lost 22,000 federal jobs in this immediate area alone, is to make sure that we're supporting them and not overtaxing them. A lot of the things that people are proposing puts a heavier burden on a lot of our small businesses. And we want to make sure that we're cutting red tape, that we're not adding any new taxes to them whatsoever, and then giving them the type of support around mentorship and other things to help them to survive. I've talked to our bar owners, I've talked to our restaurant owners, and they're really hurting in a lot of particular areas. But it's not just those, but it's also our barbershops. I took a walk on 8th Street not too long ago and talked to just our barbershops and walking up and down the stores. And I talked to a barber who had been there over 30 years, and it was his father's business that he had inherited. And we want to make sure that those are being helped and not being overtaxed. So my biggest thing is cutting red tape, providing support for them, access to capital to do improvements, and when they need it the most.
That's great. One thing about a small business as well is getting folks to those small businesses and around DC into different neighborhoods. So the next question is related to transportation and mobility. Transportation and mobility policies would you prioritize in the city, and also in Ward 2, to ensure that Ward 2 is safe, accessible, and efficient for
Mhm.
pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, drivers, and all the ways you get around DC?
And this question was asked of me in one of our forums, but I do support protected bike lanes. I want to make sure that we're actually using bike lanes correctly in the areas, specifically our high trafficked areas, so that we can cut down on some of the traffic. We have a lot of bike shares that are here, but I think we could do a better job of that, specifically in areas that we've seen a lack of businesses, like Ward 8, but also like we're talking about is Ward 2. We want to make sure that we're using bike lanes correctly and that they're protected as well. We want to continue to support WMATA. I think WMATA is still underfunded, and we need to make sure that we have the bus lines. We've seen a cutback in bus lines over the years. My children travel through Ward 2 on their way to school each and every morning. And we've seen that we don't have enough lines hitting enough stops. We actually reduced the stop numbers a year ago, and we need to add those back because what that causes is congestion, and it makes for people not wanting to use the bus system because of the timing of the buses and the frequency of the bus arrivals. So we need to make sure that WMATA as a whole and metro system as a whole, that we're getting our fair share from the other jurisdictions that contribute to that. I think DC has contributed a lot, its fair share, and we need a system that actually where everything is equitable as far as using our WMATA and metro system.
I run a biking organization called Bike to the Beach, so I'm happy to hear that you are a fan of the bike lane. It's my
Yes.
favorite. It's my favorite way of getting around DC. With all the rain over the last few days, like it's kind of made my travel less enjoyable because I've had to use cars so much. So I appreciate your support of that. The next question is regarding public spaces and quality of life. What steps would you take to ensure Ward Two's public spaces, including libraries, parks, community facilities, and more, are well maintained, welcoming, and actively used by both residents and visitors?
And so for our public spaces, both inside and outside, I want to make sure that particularly that they're safe. That is my biggest thing. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about public safety, but people don't use a lot of our facilities sometimes because they don't feel that they're safe. We need to make sure that we have the right safety measures around them and that people can enjoy them on a regular basis. I think about areas that we've seen some activities in our city that have not been safe. But then again, we also have to make sure that they're also funded correctly. Our library system, we did a lot of renovations in the past and we built some great libraries throughout the city. But I think the Shaw Library is currently going through some construction things at the current time. And I remember when I was actually working with someone who was a chair of the library board, John Hill, who lived in the area in Ward 2. We were trying to make sure that they were well funded, and we did that through making sure that they had their own procurement. So we want to make sure that we're funding our libraries and our public spaces correctly, and that's going to be a priority for me.
On that note, let me ask you, with your experience with the school board and
Mhm.
schools in DC, you're just speaking about libraries. Do you have a vision for how libraries and schools can work together to
Mhm.
address the issues we have in the city? And just name a few, you talk about safety, which we won't go back into, but I know, for example, that DC, for example, when it comes to reading, is not where we should be on test scores.
Right.
Right. There's a lot of concern about providing safe public spaces for youth to go to so that
Mhm.
they have alternatives to doing things in the streets or causing trouble. Right. So give me thoughts about how libraries and public spaces and schools can work together.
Yeah, most definitely. You guys have a wonderful, and he's a great partner in literacy, and that is Alistair Chang from your ward too on the State Board of Education with me. And that is his number one issue. And the thing that I think we both truly appreciate is that we want to make sure that our libraries and schools do work together. They don't really work together as well as they should. We should be pushing our students there because what we're trying to advocate is the reading of more books, of novels, because that improves all of our literacy, also making sure that we use them for any type of training that we're going to have on literacy. We are pushing the science of reading. And I think a lot of those things should happen in libraries to work with DCPS, to work with the other LEAs that are in the community, to have their trainings in libraries so that we're utilizing not just the reading of itself and checking out books and everything, but also some of the other areas that we can bring people into the libraries. I don't think our libraries are visited enough, are utilized for their spaces and for their meeting places. And so we really want to make sure that we're partnering our training with DCPS, with the other LEAs, enforcing that if we're going to be talking about literacy, that those things happen inside of libraries, making sure that we have all of our students getting library cards. I know my children have library cards and everything like that, but that's not something that we truly enforce as far as making sure that every child should have a library card in our library and be able to go over there and use them for both their internet and to check out books and to actually read novels. That is my ideal of how we could work closer together.
And for those who are uninitiated, what's an LEA?
An LEA is a local education agency.
Okay,
So
great.
DCPS happens to be one itself. That's the biggest one. And then you'll have your other charter schools, which are big and small. You can have charter schools that have up to 20 schools, like KIPP DC, or you may have one that has a just one site school, like a social justice, or one of the other charter schools that only has one facility. So they call
Oh,
them
great.
local
Well,
education agencies. Yes, sir.
great. Thank you. Thank you. So next question is regarding housing stability and homelessness. What policies would you support to address homelessness in Ward 2 while ensuring residents have access to housing, supportive services, and safe communities?
We want to make sure one of the biggest things about housing and homelessness is tackling the problem that deals with not only just creating the facilities for them to go into, but we want them to stay there once we get the help. And that means mental health. I think they are paired together when we're talking about homelessness in particular, because a lot of individuals, for whatever reasons, even when we find them housing, they revert back to going on the streets from particular reasons. So we have to compare those together. So that's one of the things that I would make sure that we're working strongly on. I used to work at Human Services for DC government, so I know that is a very big situation. And then as far as housing and affordability, we have to make sure that we are making and building housing around transit, making sure that wherever we have a metro stop and we can build more housing and build a little bit more density, that we're utilizing that land to its maximum amount. That way, we're not creating more congestion, but we're actually building where people get to and from their apartments without adding to congestion. So those are my biggest ideas about that. We want to fund projects, as I said, I was on the Housing Finance Agency, projects that are very located near transit transportation so that people can use that.
That's great. And the next one question is regarding accountability and results. It relates to everything we've talked about so far. All right. So if elected, what measurable goals or outcomes would you commit to achieving in the city, particularly for Ward 2 during your first term?
Yes, one thing that I want to institute, and I think we go about having oversight a lot of the times, all the data that we would like to do. And one of the things that I want to create is like a scorecard for government agencies to see how they're doing and holding them accountable, especially since we are also over budgets and seeing are we getting the biggest bang for our buck. We need to apply it directly to how they are performing, whether we're creating particular KPIs for them, but we have to have an accountability system. And that's one thing that the day one I'm going to do is create an accountability system for me personally as a council member that will be applicable, especially since even though I'm at large, to Ward 2. And then I will meet with your ANCs and with your council member and to make sure that we're hitting the notes that we need to in Ward 2. My job as an at-large council member is to hold every agency accountable to do its job in each ward. And that's one thing that we want to do is create an accountability system, a data system, and grade each agency as to how they're performing based on the budget that they get.
Now, that's something that you would work with other council members to implement? Is that something you would you make a new department that does that? How do you institutionalize the accountability and the scorecard?
I can't obligate the city to create a whole data system. I know some time ago we had what we called a ComSat, a lot of accountabilities that was during the Fenty administration where we were really grading agencies. I don't know if they still use that. I haven't heard anything about it, but what you really did is you had a grading system across the board. I know that I can only speak for myself in the beginning of this is to create
Yeah.
something that hopefully other council members will see the futility of it and everything and just want to be a part of it and we can create it citywide. But I know I'm going to be grading agencies on each department and then share that information with each council member and how they're performing in their particular ward so that we can work smarter together.
Yeah, I love that. And I think in these conversations I've had, and as folks have answered that question, there seems to be similar outlook, right,
Mhm.
related to whether it's a scorecard or whether it's other metrics to hold she's more accountable. So it's obviously it's a good idea and something that seems to be, at least around this campaign, a lot of folks have voiced that as a solution. And one thing
Yeah.
I've always liked to think is the best ideas from the campaign kind of bubble up and become real, regardless of what happens on June 16th.
I like your council member. I've worked with her on a number of other issues. So, we did the cell phone initiative, and it was great working with her on that particular issue. And so I know most of the council members pretty well, so I can hit the ground running. And I
Yeah.
think if I create the scorecard and the framework and everything, and the relationships that I've built with them, I think this is something that we really could bring real accountability. And then when we're doing oversight, we'll have some legitimate data to base it on our questions on.
Because you mentioned it again, the uninitiated, what's the cell phone bill that you worked on with Brooke Pinto?
Yes, what we did is it was really amazing. Kids didn't like it as much, but we took cell phones basically out of the school day. Kids, most schools, we didn't have a standard policy. Some LEAs were using allowed children to use their cell phones and other apparatus during the day. We felt that that was a distraction. So what we did is we instituted a law that we have a no cell phone free kind of during the school day policy. So kids come in, they put their phones away when they first arrive, whichever system that they use. Some people use Lockbox, some other use like a zipper bag. and then they're not distracted during the course of the day, and they get them back at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think we're all trying to figure out what's a healthy amount of screen time to have.
Yes,
Uh,
and screen time, we're trying to cut down on screen time. I'm just going to say it real quick. We actually had some people come before the State Board of Education, and they're really concerned about the screen time that all of our students and how early that time starts for a
yeah.
lot of students. They want to have more personal, interperson relationships and conversations where teachers are truly in front of them and not in front of some type of screen during a particular time. So, and I truly support that 100%, especially coming out of COVID. I think that more than anything proved that screen time is not good. Straight screen time where we had 18 months where kids did not have the opportunity to interact with their peers or with their educator. And it had a big effect on the mentality of a lot of our children. So I'm all for lessening the amount of screen time that children have.
Yeah, as a parent of two, of a 7 and 9-year-old, and it's definitely a constant concern, right? It's
Yes, it is.
there's good that can become from a screen, learning programs and so forth, but there's also like a bad side as well. The last question is regarding equity and inclusive growth. DC has seen a lot of growth. I think a lot of the things that has been discussed over the campaign is ways to improve
Mhm.
DC, bring more business here, bring more money here. But sometimes when that happens, certain folks are left out. So the question is, how can you, what policies do you have in mind to ensure that we grow, but was also we grow in a way that allows everyone in DC to benefit? So longtime residents can benefit as well as new residents. So older residents can benefit as long as younger residents. For Ward 2 can benefit as much as Ward 8 and vice versa.
As a resident of Ward 8, I truly feel this every single day. I remember when the Whole Food opened on, I believe is it O or P Street, I believe, when it first opened up. And that was such a big thing. But at the same time, I was remembering is that we did not have a grocery store at that particular time when that Whole
Yeah.
Foods was actually opening in Ward
Yeah,
8.
P Street.
We had
Yeah.
80,000 residents. That's kind of equal to what Ward 2 has. And I was just thought about the equity and all of that, that we did not, and we still have not had a Whole Foods. So my plan about equity is making sure that whenever we have any type of retail group, commercial group that wants to open a business, we want to sit down and talk with them. What is your equity and hold them accountable to this? What is your equity stance on this? We don't want you coming into a community that has 20 stores, has a Trader Joe's, a Whole Food, and everything, while other communities do not. So that's one thing that I'll be talking to as we finance different commercial groups that come in and retailers that come in. But I also want to make sure that I'm working with ANCs. I believe the biggest thing about any community is making sure you're working with ANCs to make sure that community is getting what it wants and that it fits the fiber of that community. As the only ANC that's in our particular race, in the independent race, that I understand that ANCs understand their community. And that's your first stop when you're talking about equity because they know what's there and what's needed. And then you
Yeah.
balance that across the city, just making sure that everybody is communicating with each other. And so, as a former ANC, my first stop is always gonna be sitting in an ANC meeting and listening, not talking, but listening to what that community wants and feels is best for their community about any smart growth at all. Because they can tell you how much housing they want, what public spaces they want to stay the way that they are, or where there can be more support around public safety. So that is always going to be my first stop is with the ANCs.
That's great. That kind of wraps us up for our primary questions. But I do, because you have such a strong education background, I think I'd be
Mhm.
amiss to not ask you a question related to education.
Sure.
You've obviously been in the education field.
No problem.
So, Jacques, you spent a lot of your 30-year career in DC supporting school systems. So, I think I'd be amiss without if I did not ask you what your vision for education in DC is and how you would affect education in a positive way as an at-large council member.
Yes, and I appreciate this question because it is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. What I really would like to see our city do is close the gap between growth, which we're seeing we're the number one in the nation in recovery and growth, in academic growth, and proficiency, because at the same time, we're not graduating enough students. I don't believe our percentage is high enough that we're graduating students that are proficient in their grade level. So, where I would like to see more accountability and hold the system as a whole is closing that gap between growth and proficiency. We do our children a disservice when we graduate them and that we send them off to college or into careers. And I'll give you some numbers really quick, which are quite frightening, is that we have a 79% graduation rate, but we only have a 16% college and career readiness rate. So I would like to see us close that particular rate. And there are a number of ways that we can do that because I believe we have the accountability mechanisms in there. We also are working on our high school graduation requirements, and that will allow for everything that has to happen before they graduate. And I think if we put in the right systems, that we'll see that actually close. But right now, that is my number one issue is closing growth and proficiency. And I believe DC is on its way. But the one thing I can do as a council member, particularly as an at-large council member, is make sure we're having the funding that we need. High intensity tutoring is making an enormous impact. We have to fund those programs. We have to fund community schools, which provide wraparound services for our neediest and most marginalized communities. They make the differences because a lot of those kids in those communities, such as my ward 8, are coming to school without the needed things that they need. They're having a lot of difficulties at home. But when we can have community schools in the right places, then we make the type of impact that we want to. So those are two of the biggest things that I want to make sure that we're doing. Continue working on literacy and math, but also the high intensity tutoring and community schools are my biggest things that I'm working on.
That's great. I'm happy that you have experience in seeing and being part of the solutions and have a vision for the future.
Thank
As
you.
we wrap up this interview and discussion, is there anything else that you want to say to Ward 2 voters that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
I'll just wrap it up by saying this is the most consequential election that we'll see since home rule started, where we see so much movement in the leadership up and down our government. And it's also a time where we're seeing and experiencing budget constraints for the first time in 25 years since the Federal Control Board, Financial Control Board. So we need to make sure that we're getting people that are smart, that have experience, has history, and tenure in understanding how our city operates, the uniqueness of it, but also the government experience. I have that. I am uniquely qualified because of the various roles that I've played in the government throughout the last 30 years. But I'm also smart enough, and I went back and got my doctorate to know how policies really work and how you implement them. And I think Ward 2 should pick me as their number one, rank me number one for those mere factors that I'm experienced, I'm present, I'm practical about my policy making, and I'm going to make sure that I'm looking out for Ward 2 and its residents as they continue to grow and make sure that they thrive. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate this conversation.
yeah, thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Jacques. I really appreciate you sitting down with me and sitting down and talk to Ward 2 directly. Best
All
of
right,
luck on your campaign, and
sir.
we'll see you on the road.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.